I'm new to the out-of-home space in general. I've spent most of my career doing internet marketing, PPC on Facebook and Google and search engine optimization, et cetera. It's always nerve-wracking presenting to a group of marketers because you all know what bad design looks like. So I hope you'll forgive me, because while HubSpot and Flock had large, talented design teams, I wasn't on them. So I'm also going to do annoying things like fade-in animations that probably annoy people. But my goal for today is I'm going to cover a lot of material at a pretty shallow depth, because I'm not trying to we're not going to do exercises and run through trying to really understand and learn the subject matter. I want to share with you how I've been teaching people, how I've been leading teams and organizations, so you can understand how they think. For anybody on the call who has kids, you might recognize this particular character, just helping you understand how they think so that you'll be able to better sell to them in the future and have a conversation where you're speaking their language. The first thing that I wanted to dig into is, why is out of home always portrayed as dystopian in the future, right? The sci-fi writers of the world have been relatively good at predicting, the future. And they don't necessarily think we're going to do the best and most interesting things with the tools and capabilities that we have. This survey HubSpot does every year, it's just, who do you consider to be trustworthy? At the top, as you'd expect, are like doctors and firefighters and teachers. Down, you have like baristas and professional sports athletes. Below them, you have marketing and sales professionals. Now, this survey is from 2016, so you'll be happy to know that we used to rank below cars salesmen and lobbyists and politicians. Since 2016, we have successfully become more trustworthy than politicians and lobbyists, but I'm not sure if that's a reflection of us doing a better job or them doing a worse one. But this is a problem, right? Like, people don't trust that marketers are going to do good things with the tools that we have. And it's not just consumers. Our own peers don't trust us. So this is a survey from a firm called Forney's. This always bothered me, right? 73% of CEOs think marketers lack business credibility. 80% of CEOs don't trust marketers, but they do trust CFOs. And then I added this one for this because I know there's a lot of agencies. 78% of the CEOs say ad and media agencies are not performance driven enough. And both of those groups lacking trust bother me a lot, because we didn't come into this profession to make the world a worse place. And we also didn't come into this profession to waste our company's money. We're here to help our businesses grow by creating value for our marketplaces. That hasn't come across in everything that we've done as a profession. So the next question that brought me to is, why are these tiny screens beating the real world? The out-of-home ad revenue in the US went from around $5 billion to around $10 billion in the last 20 years. And the internet ad revenue went from around $8 billion to around $124 billion in the last 20 years. Doubling in revenue is a neat trick. Going by 10x, 15x in revenue growth, that's where we start to get into real disruptive innovation. And one thing I wanted to point out, because it's not just that we're spending more on advertising. This is what's called a correlation coefficient. It helps you see if two types of data are related to each other. So the growth of total ad spend and GDP growth are very closely correlated to each other. If the economy goes down, we generally spend less money on advertising in basically the same proportion, and vice versa. So it's not like this money was created out of thin air. It was taken from other places and allocated to these new channels that as they were emerging, and as the overall economy and GDP grew. What interests me about the internet one, though, is internet isn't what's winning. Mobile ads are what's really driving that growth. So on this chart on the left, you can see the red is desktop ads and the black bars are the growth in mobile ad revenues. And desktop ad revenue has remained relatively flat over the last 10 years, while mobile ad revenues have created essentially a whole new category of advertising out of nothing. But I truly think that out of home should, when we think about just the experience, that we get some credit for that mobile advertising, because when you look at where are people when they're using their mobile devices, they're generally out of home. The periods of peak mobile usage are the periods of when the highest percentage of people are out of home. What's different is that the mobile devices became really smart. They're all connected. They have interactive and immersive experiences. But what we consider out of home traditionally, like billboards and place-based advertising, et cetera, didn't adopt the same technical capabilities as the mobile device. And there's not a huge technology reason why you can't. There's a TV in the room here with me, and it could be using the same basic technology stack that mobile devices use. It just hasn't been built before. So when we feel like we're losing, or we feel like internet is doing this great job, I just really wanted to point out that it's not that there's something fundamental about quote unquote internet advertising that makes it better. Short rant, I hate internet and out of home as categories. Internet just means screens that are connected to each other, and they can be smart and they can be useful. We can do that with digital displays and digital signage just as easily as we can do that with mobile devices. Out of home, I've never liked as just like a generic category because it defines itself by what it isn't instead of what it is. For me, what out of home has always been is the experiences that people have in the real world. I forget who had the quote, but nobody's winning awards for ad campaigns that they're running on Facebook or something like that. But people win awards because you have these beautiful immersive experiences in out of home as a category. So I want to talk about, I hate when people use disruptive innovation generally in startup pitches because they usually use it wrong. There's two main criteria. You've heard of disruptive innovation with Uber, the world's largest taxi company doesn't own any cars, the world's largest hotel chain doesn't own any rooms, Airbnb. The two main parameters that generally indicate just truly disruptive innovation instead of just great businesses being run, one is low-end disruption. So you saw this with Uber with their original black car service. They made it accessible and affordable and usable for people like me who work in startups and were not taking black car services 10 years ago. They start at the low end of the market and then disrupt up. And there was this report in The Economist a couple months or weeks ago that I really liked, which compares us to, as out of home or outdoor, to Facebook. So 20% of the revenue comes from the top 100 advertisers on Facebook. About the same percentage comes in terms of out of home. We know out of home is a local spend. And we might consider that the low end of the market, but we need to re-engineer the industry, the way that we work with and interact with people. Is unlocking that low end of the market is the same low end of the market that makes Facebook so powerful. I'm going to spend most of this call, though, talking about the second axis of disruptive innovation, which is different measures of performance. So this is where you take people who are non-consumers, who aren't spending money in whatever your industry is, and bring them into your industry by providing whatever matters in terms of their performance. I love this quote. This is my old boss at HubSpot. Internet ads are a bloody business, but at least you can see where you're going. And it's easy to buy, right? Jim and Barry both talked about, you can hop online right now and deploy a Facebook ad campaign before I'm even done with this slide, much less before I'm done with this presentation. That is something that people care about, right? Time is money, and difficulty adds cost, and it adds opportunity cost, et cetera. So speed and ease is one measure of performance that we could unlock that could bring other people into the industry. And I had to remind my team about this. For those who remember, it's not like Facebook always had a self-serve ad platform, by the way. This is a screenshot from thefacebook.com, which is what they used to be called. You still had to send an email to a sales rep and talk to them. They would do an RFP. It was a few years after this screenshot that they actually launched their sort of self-service platform and made it really easy for people to buy. So it's not, again, just showing there's nothing fundamentally different about internet ads versus out-of-home ads. The performance mindset is what's different. And I want to talk about that for just a brief second, because I've heard this from folks as we've been doing our reverse stealth mode and calling everybody in the industry to learn about it, because again, we're not from out of home. Do analytics devalue media inventory? If you give marketers real-time data and real-time control over campaigns, will you show it doesn't work or make them think it doesn't work just because they're not able to measure it? That's not how performance marketers think. They will find ways to make it work. The feedback loop is you build an experiment, you run a baseline. Right now we have people running on our network and they're running with really low budgets because we have no idea what the conversion rates and such are going to be for them. But then they analyze what's happening, they learn, they create a new hypothesis, they build a new experiment to establish a new baseline, just continuously running through this feedback loop. If there's no data to power the feedback loop, whether it's number of impressions you got, number of targeted impressions that you got, phone calls, whatever the analytics piece is, there's no way to improve. And if you can't improve it, then it's not going to be interesting to performance marketers who are by definition focusing on improvements in performance. This is a screenshot I fundamentally disagree with because I don't think there are things you can't measure. I think there are things that are harder to measure, and there are things that you can't measure with as great certainty. One of the reasons performance marketers tend to start with things like Google AdWords is because it's very easy to measure. It's very easy to optimize for, as opposed to brand campaigns that they're harder to optimize for, but as we all know, there are metrics relating to it. Generally when I'm teaching, I do this very dramatic thing where I drop a pen like 5 or 6 times and show that the pen will always hit the ground 5 or 6 times. In marketing, right, like we can send out an email to 10,000 people saying, click this link and we will give you $1, an objectively rational thing to do. And at least like 20% of people will ignore it or decide not to or whatever, because it's a social science. It's not a hard science. And usually when I'm talking to folks, I'm worried about them going too far the other direction, which is the physics envy and thinking you should be able to measure everything. You shouldn't not measure anything, but you also shouldn't try and measure everything because you're not going to be able to. No two analytics systems are ever going to agree with each other. This is just the nature of how analytics work. If you have Google Analytics and HubSpot, they're not going to agree with each other, but that's okay because again, you're looking for changes. You need a metric by which you can power that feedback loop. And then this is just something I tell the team all the time. You can be wrong as long as you're consistently wrong and directionally correct. My wife and I were just camping in Yellowstone. She's a much faster runner than I am. She doesn't have to outrun the bear. She just has to outrun me. And it's the same for performance marketers, right? We have to make faster decisions better than competitors. And then we are the ones who are winning the market. We don't have to make perfect decisions, just better ones faster. So I want to introduce, in terms of measures of performance, the startup to scale up framework. Startups are in phase 1 are looking for something called product market fit. So for example, at our company, because we're a 7-month-old company, we're measuring the retention of advertisers who come onto the platform. So do they actually like it, right? More than anything else. Phase 2 is getting the math to work. So for every $1 I put into customer acquisition, do I get $3 out in customer lifetime value or whatever the goal is? Phase 3 is getting the math to scale. So no investor wants to give me $1 and get $3 back. They want to give me $1 million and get $3 million back. And then the 4th phase is disrupt yourself. Performance marketers generally live in phases 1 and 2. So they're always trying to get the math to work and the math to work better. And they're trying to get the math that does work to scale. Phases 1 and 4 are generally the product and engineering and R&D team's problems, not the performance marketing team's problem. But for the performance marketers, we have to accelerate revenue growth while making the actual ROI more efficient. It's a very hard thing to do. I wanted to talk briefly about the difference between data and analytics. So data, there's 2 big types. One is explicit data, so things people tell us, like survey data, et cetera. And then implicit data, which is things that they show us. Interestingly, implicit data can be a lot more useful because survey data it depends on how people see themselves, it depends on how well we write the question, et cetera. Implicit data, if I'm testing 2 different types of buttons against each other, I have really good information on which ones people preferred to click because it was very, very objective, the action that they took. And then in terms of analytics, there's understanding like what happened, why it happened, what's going to happen next, et cetera. All of this data is used in different ways for performance marketers that feeds that feedback loop. And so for the rest of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about the types of data that we use. In ROI analytics, customer-centric economics does not mean the customer is always right. The customer is often wrong, which is why they pay us to do things. But they want to fill out this sentence, right? I spend W dollars to acquire customer of persona X from source Y, and they spend an average of Z with me over the course of their lifetime. ROI analytics is another sort of access on this different measures of performance, these non-consumers. We express it as a ratio. So unit economics and business economics are different. Business economics are you have enough money to keep running. Unit economics are you have a profitable business model. So you can have a profitable business model and go out of business, and you can not go out of business and not have a profitable business model. You have money that comes in, you have money that goes out. The money that comes in is the CAC, right? The cost of acquiring a customer. It's all the sales and marketing dollars divided by the number of customers. And the money that goes out is the customer lifetime value. So somebody starts paying you, whether it's a subscription or they're just a consumer. and then they keep paying you for some period of time because eventually they either stop paying you or they die or something else happens. But that's their customer lifetime value. And if you have $1 that goes in and $2 that go out, that's a good business model, right? It's profitable. It's a ratio of 1 to 2. $2 in and $4 out is actually the same model. So it's 2 to 4 or 1 to 2 as a ratio, but it can grow faster because I can spend more money to acquire a customer because my customer lifetime value is higher. Or you can have a more profitable model where I'm spending $2 in and I'm getting $12 out. This lifetime value formula, which is based on ARPU or average revenue per unit, average order value, if you will, is where we should start as marketers. Because this is a screenshot from a guy named Brian Balfour. When you know what your customer is worth, that tells you how much you can spend to get them. You cannot sell something expensive to somebody where it's not going to fit into their business model. Facebook or Yelp or WhatsApp, MailChimp, et cetera, Slack, if they're on a low average revenue per account, then they can do things like search engine optimization, they can do things like PPC, et cetera. If you have a higher value customer, you can have a higher CAC because it works in a ratio. You can do inside sales, enterprise sales, et cetera. So I love using the Starbucks example. It's from Kissmetrics. They had an average order value of $6, but their average customer lifetime value was $14,000. They're not trying to spend $2 to sell a $6 coffee and sandwich. They're trying to spend like $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 to acquire and retain a $14,000 customer. So you start with a customer and you work your way back. This is an old friend of mine who's a periodontist and not super tech savvy, great guy though. And he asked me, should I spend money on Yelp? And so I walked him through this. His average surgery is $1,000, he nets 30%. Since he's a specialist, his customers don't come back. If they do, it's because they're suing him. So his customer lifetime value in this case is just $300. If he wants to get 1 to 3 return, which is a whole separate class, how you set that, he can spend $100 to acquire a customer. If 25% of the leads turn into customers, because he's a specialist, he can spend $25 to get the lead. Coca here is cost of customer acquisition. If he can spend, again, he's a specialist, so he's a high conversion rate. 20% of the visitors to his website convert into leads. He can spend $5 to get a visit to his website. Yelp was telling him, I think they were going to charge $3 a click, and he can spend up to $5. So as long as these numbers work, yeah, go spend money on Yelp. Spend as much money as you want, as long as it ends up looking like this. One thing I do want to point out is we all know intuitively different types of customers are worth different amounts of money. So we have these personas that we give names so everybody can remember them. But Owner Ollie was like a small business owner. It cost us $1,000 to get an Owner Ollie to become a HubSpot customer. Their average customer lifetime value was $5,300 or about 1 to 5. Marketing Mary paid more, like $11,000 in LTV. They had a higher monthly fee, et cetera. They had lower churn, but they would cost more to get. So it was a worse ratio, $5,000 to $11,000. And so you take all the stuff that we already do as marketers, the demographics, the psychographics, the behavioral, that buyer persona segmentation. And if you're really good at keeping customers, you can spend more money to get them. So if you're talking to a performance marketer, there may be some buyer personas within their business model where this works. Okay, so talking quick about funnel optimization, just the discipline of performance marketing. The top of the funnel or Tofu, right? You spend $1,000 and you got 500 website visitors. So your cost of visit acquisition was $2. Makes sense. Some of the things you can do in the top of the funnel. This was a presentation that the Google ad sales team, because Google and Facebook have big sales teams, as you all know, because they try and sell to you too. Slack was my biggest competitor at Flock. But Slack had much better brand awareness. And so they suggested that we focus on places that were mature markets, but did not have a strong brand preference towards Slack. So when I'm thinking about my top of the funnel strategy, I'm looking at, okay, where are there places that my sales reps will be able to sell to effectively, but I'm not going to have to fight this battle I can't currently win, where everybody likes Slack better than they like Flock. And there was one great outlier here, which is Texas. And if anybody's from Texas, has been to Texas, or met anyone from Texas, I used to live in Dallas. It's a wonderful place. And we never got around to it, but I literally wanted to run a billboard and TV and broadcast campaign in Texas that just said people in California love Slack, because they're just a very contrarian sort of mindset. But it's, again, that strategic thinking and using analytics to say, where is there low awareness in whatever's blocking me from being effective? If people have a strong brand preference to Slack, for example, California, as you might expect, I would have to find a different way, top of the funnel motion, if I wanted to try and win that market. We did this at HubSpot too. This was just measuring inbound marketing, which is the industry term that we were trying to sell people, versus cold calling. There are metrics that you can measure. This is just like the popularity of the movement. If I'm measuring how many people are searching for something, somewhere around 2015, inbound marketing passed cold calling in terms of search volume. So it's a top of the funnel metric that we were using to say, are we winning the campaign objective of driving adoption? One of the weaknesses that things like Google AdWords have, they have a harder time creating demand. They're good at capturing demand. But this is from, I think, the IAB report that just shows online activations indexed against media spend. So people see out-of-home ads and they go do stuff online. But we don't spend in out-of-home as much as we should based on how effective out-of-home is at driving that sort of online activation, because it's not reflected in the analytics that we see. This is a screenshot from, I don't remember what website I was working with, but this direct traffic bucket, I have no way of knowing that it was your billboard that sent that to me unless I use more sophisticated analytics like Jim Wilson is talking about. The other question is what gets credit for it? Somebody who drove the person to you to begin with, or the last thing that they did, or some mixture of the two. Again, there's no necessarily right answer. There's different reasons to use these different tools in different campaigns. And the out-of-home space can do some really cool things that we try and do some of this stuff online, like takeover campaigns of websites. That's a cool application. That would be much cooler if you were in an arena or a mall or an airport. If you also make it contextually relevant, so the ads that people are seeing are relevant to the experience that's happening around them, also known as native advertising, you can be even more effective. Or one of my favorite campaigns of all time, Gillette, with their sponsoring of Shark Week on discovery.com, the shark would swim out and take over the page, etc. Imagine being able to do interactive sort of stuff, and the real world has more power and can do cooler things than just a small screen. So the middle of the funnel, let's say you go from a 5% visit to lead to a 6% visit to lead. Doesn't sound like a huge jump, but your cost of customer acquisition has dropped from $400 to $333. Different ways that you can do that. One, every type of lead source has different efficiency. So paid search and paid social, this is one of my old reports, they have a different cost per lead. Paid social is generally cheaper than paid search because it's less competitive, but the cost per opportunity was higher. So we got really good at the sales team turning leads into opportunities. We were getting better leads out of paid social, and they were cheaper leads. They were converting at a higher rate. And then my sort of fully loaded cost of acquiring a customer was originally much higher for paid social than paid search, and then they leveled out and equaled out there. By the way, if you want to know what terrifies performance marketers, these bands are where I was supposed to be staying in between with my marketing organization. And obviously, like, we were not hitting that. So that's the kind of thing that gets a performance marketer yelled at. Bottom of the funnel, just to wrap up here, if you take the lead to customer rate and you just close a higher percentage of them, that can have the biggest impact. The bottom of the funnel is the most deterministic data, and it's what can have the biggest impact in terms of the efficiency. So something that's important is aligning marketing with the business objectives. Again, it's not something CEOs always trust that marketers are doing. Well, I guess now I am CEO, so I get to be the one not trusting people. But this is an old picture of me, as you can tell, because I have hair. When I decided to propose to my then girlfriend, knew nothing about jewelry. And so I downloaded this ebook on The Guy's Guide to Jewelry. And one of the ways to look at that is you're driving predictable revenue. This is a report that I had from my sales team, or my e-commerce website, where this is the green line is the amount of money we're supposed to be making throughout the month. The blue line is how much we're actually driving in terms of pipeline revenue. So if each customer is worth $1,000 and 10% of people who download this buy, every download's worth $100. So in order to be hitting the revenue goals with sort of pipeline revenue, I can be measuring my impact against the business's revenue goals. However, if you have a sales team, that things like ebook leads tend to close more slowly and at a lower rate. So the other thing I measure is how closely the sales team is forecasting to that month's specific revenue goals, because this is future revenue. This is what they're going to be able to close this month. And if the sales team is forecasting low, I will change the campaigns and focus on sources or conversion goals, buyer personas, whatever, that might be more expensive, but will close at a faster rate or a higher value, whatever's required to hit that month's sales goals. We don't miss goals in performance marketing. I'm going to talk super briefly about machine learning and then kick it over to Q&A for the most part. Automatically optimizing for campaign objectives. So we know this intuitively. The same person will respond differently to the same message seen at a different time and place. This is something that is uniquely powerful in out-of-home advertising. Cappy's Liquor, this is one of our advertisers. There are 3% of people who go to work after they visit Cappy's Liquor. This is from some GPS data we're working on with a partner. And super interested to find out who those 3% of people are. But in general, if the screen or the out-of-home ad unit thinks that you're on your way to work, it shouldn't show you an ad to get you to go visit Cappy's Liquor, because that's, unless you have something in common with those 3% of people. This is already hard to do. We talked about the funnels and all this other data, et cetera. What creates a lot of value in things like machine learning is it's really good at helping us answer questions we haven't thought to ask yet. If we just set the goal as drive traffic to the store, drive phone calls, drive website visits, drive coupon redemptions, whatever, and then let the machine learning algorithm optimize for it, or app installs, et cetera, it will figure out how to combine the different things in the right way. Use any definition of truth you want. This is just a screenshot from the Lunascape, and feed that in. It creates a model, a prediction test. It does this just a lot faster than even performance marketers can do it. I think people were worried about truck drivers losing their jobs to AI. I think Facebook advertisers will probably lose their jobs to AI first, because one of the best ways to use Facebook ads is to just connect your systems and analytics to Facebook and let the AI figure it out. It's really good at that. Also, I know I've talked in funnel stages. The stages are all interconnected. So this graphic shows 25% of users are coming from AdWords, 10% are coming from Instagram. But when you look down funnel, 30% of returning customers are coming from Instagram, only 3% of returning customers are coming from AdWords. So you have to think about the impact of what you're doing on every stage of the funnel. In this case, they're probably investing in Instagram ads, because they're probably optimizing for new users or returning users, which is a higher funnel metric. So keeping an eye on the whole thing. Obviously, we know it's not a linear funnel, right? We've talked about the buyer's journey. You can go backwards, you can go forwards. This is just a graphic I worked on with the folks at eBay back in the day. And we have to look at the whole picture holistically. And remember that our job is not to move somebody from one stage of the funnel to the next, because you can be in the intent phase, learn something new, and go back to the comparison phase of the buyer's journey. Our job as marketers is to identify what phase of the buyer's journey someone is in and serve them the relevant experience. Out of home, again, generally stays up here in driving awareness and relevance, et cetera, people in the research phase of the buyer's journey. But there are definitely people who go near our displays who are in the comparison or intent phase of the buyer's journey. And it's our job to figure out ways to identify who those people are and serve them the relevant experience. I'll end on one of my favorite business quotes. Jeff Bezos, Amazon makes $400,000 a minute. When his investors told him that, we know you think internet's gonna be big and all, but you don't know how to run a business because you added negative reviews to the Amazon website. And they're like, you make money when you sell things. And Bezos replied, we don't make money when we sell things. We make money when we help customers make purchase decisions. And that's really the focus of the entire buyer's journey optimization, the funnels, everything else that we're doing is getting somebody to helping somebody make a decision. Starts with helping them understand the questions that they may not have thought to ask for, where out of home is very strong. It can drive and create demand. It can get people asking questions and thinking about something new. Further down the funnel, are there ways that we can use it to educate people, to help them make a decision or to reinforce them making a decision, et cetera? That ability to have influence throughout the buyer's journey is something that's uniquely powerful in out of home, because we spend, again, most of our time outside of our homes, at least where we're not all locked down for quarantine. But even with quarantine, even with COVID, I think we've spent so much time looking at our desktops, our laptops, our mobile devices, our TVs. There's a lot of fatigue on those sorts of devices. And so the real world has more fundamental power. It just has to have the same technology built, and it has to be sold that way. Understanding what somebody's campaign objectives are, and then figuring out a way to create a feedback loop. Getting as close as you can, even if it's not perfect data, so that they can optimize their campaigns on an ongoing basis, not spend money and then go away. They need to be able to learn, develop, and spend more on an ongoing basis. And then they will spend more money with you and they'll never stop.